At the headquarters of a billion-dollar corporation, a team of experts fails to crack a crucial equation. That is, until a 7-year-old girl, the janitor's daughter, steps forward and says with total confidence, "I know how to solve it." What happens next shatters egos, reveals hidden truths, and sparks an unexpected revolution. If this story has you hooked, make sure to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Now, on with the story. Megan Miller, at 32, knew every inch of that building. She knew where the dust settled fastest, which carpets stained easily, and what time the executives left half-empty coffee cups forgotten on their desks. For 3 years, she'd worked on the cleaning crew at TechVision, a tech company that occupied the top floors of a mirrored skyscraper in the heart of Manhattan. 3 years of always entering through the back door, using the service elevator, and keeping her eyes down when she passed anyone in a suit. That Thursday afternoon, the tension was particularly thick. Megan could feel it in the air. The hallways of the 53rd floor were too quiet, and the main conference room had been sealed shut for 4 straight hours. She'd been instructed not to interrupt, not to knock, not to make a sound. But her daughter, Sophie, was waiting in the small employee break room, and it was already past 6 p.m. Sophie was only 4, but she seemed to understand the world in a way that frightened Megan. The little girl observed everything with those deep brown eyes, asked questions that left adults speechless, and had a memory that bordered on impossible. She remembered entire conversations, numbers she saw only once, things no one else noticed. Megan knew it wasn't typical, but she didn't have money for specialists. She could barely afford the rent on their small apartment in Queens, where they had lived alone since Sophie's father disappeared 3 years ago. Richard Davis had been a math professor at a private university, a quiet man with round glasses and hands always smudged with chalk dust. Megan met him when she was still working in the university cafeteria. He treated her with a kindness she wasn't used to. They talked about simple things during his class breaks. They dated in secret for 2 years. When Megan got pregnant, Richard was ecstatic, but something changed after he blew the whistle on financial irregularities at the institution where he taught. The details were fuzzy. Megan remembered tense conversations, Richard coming home with a dark expression, envelopes left under their door. He said he'd discovered a scheme involving ghost student tuition and selling diplomas. He tried to report it internally, but was fired for cause under false allegations of harassment. The story spread. He was blacklisted from teaching at any institution. They lost their apartment. They lived for a few months in a rented room, and that's where Sophie was born. Richard started teaching his daughter when she was just a few months old. He sang songs with numbers, drew geometric shapes on paper napkins, and invented games with concepts Megan couldn't grasp. He said Sophie was special, that she understood things he'd only seen in college students. But then the letter came. A plain manila envelope, no return address. Richard read it and turned pale. He said he had to go out for a few hours. He kissed Sophie's forehead, held Megan's hands, and walked out the door. He never came back. Megan searched. She went to police stations, hospitals, shelters. Nothing. It was as if Richard had been erased from existence. All that was left were the notebooks he used to teach Sophie. Pages filled with equations, drawings of constellations, notes on number theory. Megan kept them all in an old box. Sophie, even at 4, would ask to see the notebooks. She'd sit on the living room floor, run her fingers over the yellowed pages, and stay silent for hours. The sound of the conference room door opening brought Megan back to the present. She was cleaning the nearby hallway when she saw a group of men emerge, talking in irritated tones. They wore expensive suits, carried gleaming tablets, and had the posture of people used to solving problems with money. But there was something different in their faces. Exhaustion, frustration, defeat. That's when she heard the small footsteps from the opposite hall. Sophie appeared around the corner, barefoot as always, in the simple dress Megan had bought at a thrift store. The girl was holding a crumpled piece of paper and staring intently at the half-open conference room door. Megan's heart hammered against her ribs. She dropped her cleaning cloth and rushed toward her daughter. "Sophie, what are you doing here?" she whispered, trying to sound firm, but feeling panic rise in her throat. The girl didn't answer. She kept walking toward the door. Megan grabbed her arm, but Sophie pulled away with surprising strength and pushed the door open, stepping into the room. What Megan saw made her freeze. The enormous conference room was filled with people. Executives sat around a glass table that seemed to float. Digital screens covered 3 walls, all displaying graphs, numbers, and equations. In the center, on say, a larger screen, was a complex mathematical problem, full of symbols Megan couldn't comprehend. And there, in the middle of this scene of luxury and power, was her 4-year-old daughter, looking at the board with an expression of profound concentration. The silence lasted only 2 seconds. "I know how to solve that," Sophie said, her voice clear and firm, the way it was when she was sure of something. Laughter erupted around the room. It wasn't kind or amused laughter. It was the laughter of scorn, of people witnessing something absurd and offensive. A man with graying hair in a navy blue suit stood up. Robert Thompson, the company's CEO. Megan knew him by sight. Every member of the cleaning staff knew who Robert Thompson was. A man who didn't look at people like Megan. A man who treated employees like replaceable parts. "Who let this child in here?" His voice cut through the air like a blade. Megan's legs trembled. She ran into the room and grabbed Sophie's arm, trying to pull her back. Her cheeks burned with shame. She felt the weight of all those eyes on her. Eyes that said she didn't belong there, that her daughter didn't belong there. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson, I'm so sorry. She's my daughter. I was working and she just..." The words tumbled out, desperate and jumbled. But Sophie didn't move. She planted her feet and kept looking at the board. Her eyes moved rapidly, as if she were reading something only she could see. Her small fingers twitched in the air, as if she were counting or calculating. "I can solve it," Sophie repeated, and this time her voice had an urgency Megan couldn't understand. "It's about resource allocation. My dad taught me this." Another man laughed loudly. A woman in a red blazer rolled her eyes. Robert Thompson crossed his arms and tilted his head, watching Sophie with a mix of irritation and morbid curiosity. Megan could see what was going through his mind. She could see the cruelty forming before he even opened his mouth. "Your daughter?" Robert looked at Megan with contempt. "How long have you worked here?" 3 years, sir." Megan could barely speak. Her voice was a shaky whisper. 3 years cleaning our offices, and you never learned to keep your child away from important meetings." He paused, a cruel smile forming on his lips. "But since she's here, since she's interrupted a meeting involving millions of dollars and international experts, let's give the little genius a chance." Megan's blood ran cold. She knew that tone. It was the tone of someone about to do something terrible disguised as generosity. "If your daughter solves the problem on the board, not only will you keep your job, you'll be promoted. We'll give you a better contract, with a decent salary." Robert paused again, letting the hope build before crushing it. "But if she fails, you're fired, immediately, and I'll personally see to it that you never work for another company in this sector. You'll have 24 hours to leave the city." A murmur went through the room. Some executives looked uncomfortable. Others watched with morbid interest, like spectators at an impending accident. Megan felt tears welling up, but she fought them back. She looked at Sophie, who was still staring at the board with that impossible focus. "Mr. Thompson, please, she's only 4. She can't..." Megan tried to plead, but her voice failed. "So you admit you interrupted a billion-dollar meeting with a child who has nothing to contribute?" Robert smiled. "The choice is yours, honey. Either your daughter tries or I call security right now." Sophie turned to her mother. Those deep brown eyes were calm, almost serene. She took Megan's hand with a strength that seemed impossible for such a small child. "It's okay, Mom. Dad taught me this. I remember." And before Megan could say anything, before she could grab her daughter and run from that room, before she could stop what was about to happen, Sophie let go of her hand and walked to the front of the room. A woman with black hair offered her a digital marker. Sophie took it, climbed onto a chair to reach the board and began to write. Her small hands moved with precision. Numbers, symbols, lines, connecting equations. The silence in the room was absolute. No one was laughing anymore. Everyone watched, mesmerized, as a 4-year-old child, barefoot and in a simple dress, filled the board with a solution that seemed impossible. The 8 minutes that followed seemed suspended in time. Sophie moved the marker with precise strokes, creating a sequence of calculations that flowed naturally, as if she were just copying something that already existed, fully formed in her mind. Megan watched from the side of the room, her hands pressed against her chest, unable to breathe properly. Every passing second was torture. She saw the executives whispering among themselves, some frowning as they tried to follow the girl's logic, others simply watching with incredulous expressions. A man with glasses and blonde hair, who had been introduced as an expert from Germany, rose from his chair and approached the board. His eyes widened. He took out a tablet and began photographing each part of the solution. An Asian woman, described as an international logistics consultant, covered her mouth with her hands. Her face had lost all its color. Sophie climbed down from the chair when she was finished. She placed the marker on the table carefully, as if it was something precious that could break. She wiped her hands on her dress and turned to Robert Thompson. There was no triumph on her face, just exhaustion and something that looked like a sadness far too old for a 4-year-old. "Done," she said in a quiet voice. "The problem is solved. The resource allocation needs to consider not just distance and quantity, but the degradation time of each item and the actual storage capacity of each point. My dad always said that math is for helping people, not for impressing other people." The silence that followed was so thick Megan could hear her own heart beating. Robert Thompson stared at the board, then at Sophie, then back at the board. The scornful expression was gone from his face. In its place was something like shock and maybe a touch of fear. The German expert was the first to speak. His voice came out shaky, in English, thick with an accent. This is correct. She used a variation of graph theory combined with dynamic programming. The elegance of the solution is extraordinary. He looked at Sophie as if he were seeing a ghost. "How did you learn this?" "My dad taught me," Sophie answered simply. "He was a professor. He taught me every night before I went to sleep. He said numbers tell stories and that every equation is a way to understand the world." A female voice echoed from the back of the room. It was the woman in the red blazer who had rolled her eyes minutes before. Christine Adler, a name Megan had heard a few times, a powerful businesswoman, owner of a network of consulting firms. She stood up and walked to where Sophie stood, her high heels clicking on the marble floor. "Your father was a professor?" Christine asked, crouching to be at Sophie's level. There was something different in her voice now, something softer, almost gentle. "What was his name?" "Richard Davis," Sophie replied, and Megan felt a pang in her chest at hearing the name. "He taught applied mathematics at Metropolitan University." A murmur rippled through the room. Some executives exchanged glances. Robert Thompson frowned and took out his phone, typing something quickly. The German expert had grown even paler. "Richard Davis?" repeated an older man with a grey mustache. "I know that name. He was that professor who blew the whistle on irregularities and was fired on false charges." "Yes," Christine finished, still looking at Sophie. "I read about the case a few years ago. He claimed the university was selling fake diplomas and embezzling scholarship funds. He was publicly smeared and lost everything." "They said he did bad things," Sophie said, and for the first time her voice trembled. "But he didn't. He just wanted the students to have a real education. He just wanted things to be fair." "And where is your father now?" Christine asked gently. Sophie looked down at her own bare feet, her hands clenched into tiny fists. "He left when I was a baby. My mom said he had to go away because of a letter he got. He went out to solve a problem and never came back." The girl looked up and there were tears in her eyes now. "But he left me his notebooks, and I read them every day. It's like he's still teaching me." Megan couldn't hold back any longer. She crossed the room in quick strides and hugged Sophie, hiding her daughter's face against her shoulder. The tears she had been holding back finally fell, soaking her worn-out uniform. She felt ashamed of crying, of this display of weakness in front of all these important people. But she couldn't stop. Robert Thompson put his phone away. His face had a strange expression now, as if he were calculating something. He looked at Megan, then at Sophie, and took a step back. "Well," he said, his voice controlled but without the earlier cruel tone, "it seems we have an unusual situation. The girl solved the problem. I must admit I'm impressed." "Impressed?" Christine stood up and there was anger in her voice now. "Robert, this child just did in 8 minutes what a team of international experts couldn't do in 3 weeks. And you're impressed?" "Christine, I didn't know that." "You didn't know anything because you didn't want to know." Christine turned to the other executives. "You laughed. We all laughed at a child who had something valuable to offer. We laughed because she's the daughter of a cleaning lady. We laughed because she was barefoot and in a simple dress." She paused, her voice growing lower, heavier. "I came from a humble background too. My mother was a housekeeper her whole life. I know what it's like to be invisible. I know what it's like to have knowledge and no voice." Robert opened his mouth to respond, but Christine held up a hand, silencing him. "Megan, that's your name, isn't it?" She turned to Megan, who could only nod. "You're fired from here, but not because your daughter failed. You're fired because I'm hiring you. I need someone to manage vendor relations at my company. The salary is 4 times what you make here. And Sophie will have access to the best educational program I can provide." Megan couldn't process what she was hearing. She looked at Christine, then at Sophie, then back at Christine. This had to be a dream, or a cruel joke. I don't understand," Megan whispered. "You don't have to understand now, just accept." Christine took a card from her pocket and handed it to Megan. "Monday, 9 a.m. This is the address." But Sophie, who had remained quiet during the conversation, pulled away from her mother's embrace and took a step forward. She looked directly at Robert Thompson. "I don't want anything from you," she said, her voice clear. "You made a bet with my mother's life. You thought it would be funny to watch us suffer. I don't want a reward from someone like that." The comment landed on the room like a bomb. Some executives looked down, ashamed. The German expert nodded slowly, his expression grim. Robert Thompson turned red, but before he could respond, the conference room door swung open violently. A young man entered, wearing jeans and a crisp white shirt. He must have been about 25, with dark hair combed back, a square, jaw and eyes that held the same coldness as Robert Thompson's. Megan recognized him from photos around the office. Tyler Thompson, the CEO's son. He had studied at European universities and returned to the States a few months ago to take on a leadership role in the company. "What's going on in here?" Tyler asked, looking around. His eyes landed on the digital board, then on Sophie. "Did someone solve the allocation problem?" "The daughter of one of the cleaning staff," one of the executives answered, with poorly disguised sarcasm in his voice. Tyler walked to the board. He read the solution in silence, his eyes moving quickly. He took out his phone and started checking each part of the equation, using some kind of app. After 2 minutes, he put the phone away and turned to Sophie. "You did this?" There was disbelief in his voice. Sophie just nodded. "Interesting," Tyler said, but his voice held no admiration. It held a challenge. "Very interesting that a 4-year-old can solve a problem that stumped a team of PhDs. Convenient, even." "Tyler, what are you implying?" Christine asked, her tone a warning. "I'm not implying anything. I'm just saying it. Would be easy to memorize a pre-written solution." Tyler crossed his arms. "Anyone can repeat something they've been taught." "She didn't memorize anything," the German expert interjected. "The solution has original variations. She adapted the problem creatively." "Then she'll have no problem solving another one," Tyler retorted. He walked to a cabinet, opened a drawer, and pulled out a tablet. He typed quickly and connected the device to the digital board. A new equation appeared on the screen. It was visibly more complex than the last one, full of symbols and variables that seemed to form a mathematical labyrinth. This problem was generated by an AI specifically to test the limits of human problem-solving capabilities. If you really know what you're doing, you'll be able to solve it. Megan's blood ran cold. She looked at Tyler and saw in him the same contempt she had seen in his father. But there was something else there. There was envy. There was the anger of someone who couldn't stand to be outdone by someone he considered inferior. "And if she doesn't solve it?" Christine asked, her voice low and dangerous. "If she doesn't solve it, then it proves the first solution was luck or a fraud, and that you were all fooled by a cheap stunt." Tyler smiled, but it was a smile without warmth. "And in that case, I think it's only fair that mother and daughter leave here quietly, without accepting any job offers or undeserved rewards." Sophie looked at the new problem on the board. Her hands were trembling slightly. She turned to Megan, and in her eyes was fear. Real fear. For the first time since she'd entered the room, Sophie looked like just a scared little kid. But then her eyes moved to the tablet Tyler was holding, to the Tech Vision Company logo on the screen. And something in her expression changed, something Megan couldn't identify, but that sent a chill down her spine. "I accept," Sophie said, her voice quiet but firm. "But if I solve it, I want you to apologize, not to me, to your father." Tyler raised an eyebrow. For a moment he seemed taken aback, but then the smile returned, crueler than before. "It's a deal." He held out the digital marker to Sophie. "Show us your genius, then." And as Sophie climbed back onto the chair as her small fingers gripped the marker too tightly, as Megan felt the world spin around her, a single certainty cut through her mind like a blade. None of this was going to end well. Sophie stood before the board for almost a full minute. Her eyes scanned the equation from side to side, and Megan could see her daughter's lips moving silently, as if she were talking to someone only she could see. Maybe she was talking to Richard. Maybe she was remembering the nights he drew problems on the floor of their rented room, using chalk stolen from the university. Then, with a sudden movement, Sophie began to write. This time was different. She didn't flow with the same confidence as before. She would stop, erase, reconsider. Her eyebrows furrowed in deep concentration. The marker trembled slightly in her hand. Megan saw sweat forming on the girl's forehead, saw how her small shoulders were too tense for a 4-year-old. 20 minutes passed, then 25. The room remained in absolute silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was no longer the silence of scorn or morbid curiosity. It was the silence of people witnessing something they couldn't fully comprehend. The German expert had sat on the edge of the table, his eyes fixed on Sophie's every move. Christine Adler had her hands clasped, her knuckles white from the pressure. Even Robert Thompson seemed to have forgotten to feign indifference. Tyler, however, watched with a smirk. Every so often he checked his watch. He was waiting for the moment Sophie would make a mistake, the moment it would be proven that the first solution had been luck or a fraud. Megan hated him in that instant, hated him with an intensity that scared her. At 32 minutes, Sophie stopped writing. She placed the marker on the table with the same delicacy as before. She climbed down from the chair, wiped her hands on her dress, and turned to Tyler. Her eyes were red, tired. There was something broken in her gaze that made Megan's heart ache. "I'm finished," Sophie said, her voice hoarse from concentration. Tyler stood up and walked to the board. He took out the tablet again and began to check the solution. This time, it took longer. His fingers slid across the screen, comparing equations, verifying each step. The smirk gradually faded from his face. First, he looked serious, then confused, and finally something that looked like pain crossed his features. He lowered the tablet. He looked at Sophie, then at his father, then back at Sophie. It's correct." The words came out with difficulty, as if each syllable hurt. "You actually did it. You solved it on your own." "Not on my own," Sophie answered, and her voice trembled for the first time. "My dad taught me. Everything I know, he gave me. And he's not here to see that it was worth it. He's not here because people like you and your father decided. He didn't matter." Tyler was silent. Something happened in his face in that moment. The defenses fell, the arrogance dissolved, and what was left was just a young man who suddenly looked tired and lost. "You're right," he said, and to everyone's surprise, his eyes began to well up. "My God, you're right. I've spent years trying to prove I was better than my father, trying to be colder, smarter, more ruthless. and in the process, I became just like him. Tyler turned to Robert. Dad, I need to apologize, not just for now, for everything. For pushing you away, because I thought you were weak any time you showed kindness. For turning our company into a battlefield. Robert Thompson looked as shocked as everyone else. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Finally, he just nodded, unable to form words. But the moment was interrupted by a sound no one had noticed until then. The sound of a video recording being stopped. One of the younger executives, a man in a grey suit who had been quiet the whole time, was pocketing his phone. His eyes met Megan's for a fraction of a second, and there was something guilty in his gaze, something that made her stomach clench. I think we've had enough excitement for one day, Christine said, breaking the heavy silence that had settled. Megan, Sophie, why don't you two go home and rest? We'll talk about everything calmly on Monday. Megan could only nod. She took Sophie's hand and the two of them left the room in silence. No one stopped them. No one said another word. They walked down the empty hallway, got into the service elevator, and it was only when the doors closed that Sophie began to cry. It wasn't a loud or dramatic cry. It was a silent, deep sob from someone who had held on for too long. I was so scared, Mom, Sophie sobbed. I thought I was going to get it wrong. I thought you were going to lose your job because of me. You didn't get it wrong, sweetie. You were incredible. Megan hugged her daughter, feeling her own tears fall. Your dad would be so proud of you. They took the bus home, like always. The small apartment in Queens had never felt so welcoming. Megan made a simple dinner, rice with beans and a fried egg. Sophie ate in silence, still processing everything that had happened. Afterward, they lay down in the bed they shared, and Megan sang the same song Richard used to sing when Sophie was a baby. The night passed peacefully. For the first time in a long time, Megan slept without worrying about the next day. She had a new job waiting. She had hope. But the hope only lasted until Saturday morning. Megan woke up to her phone vibrating non-stop. Messages from unknown numbers flooded her screen. Calls from people she didn't know. Confused and still groggy, she opened one. Of the messages, it was a link to a video. With trembling hands, she clicked it. The video showed Sophie in the conference room, but something was wrong. Very wrong. It had been manipulated. The moments where she hesitated were cut. The times she paused to think were gone. What was left was a sequence that made it look like Sophie was just copying something, repeating it mechanically and arrogantly. The added soundtrack was dramatic and sinister. The video's title read, 4-year-old solves math problem, hoax or staged act. Megan felt the floor drop out from under her. She scrolled down, reading the comments. There were hundreds of them, thousands. This is obviously rehearsed. Someone coached her. The mom is using her kid to get a job. Shameful. Kids don't solve problems at this level. It's all a setup. Why is no one questioning how a cleaning lady could afford this kind of education for her daughter? The video had tens of thousands of views, and it was growing. Megan checked other social media platforms. It was everywhere. News sites had picked up the story. Headlines screamed doubt and accusation. Child prodigy or elaborate hoax, tech company investigates. 4-year-old sparks. Controversy by solving complex math equation. Experts question authenticity of viral video. Sophie woke up to find her mother sitting on the living room floor. The phone dropped beside her, tears streaming down her face. The little girl approached slowly, picked up the device and read some of the messages. Her face, which had finally relaxed the night before, became tense and frightened again. Mom, why are people saying these things? Sophie's voice was small and broken. I didn't lie, I really solved it. You saw me. I know, sweetie, I know. Megan pulled her daughter into a hug. But people don't always want to see the truth. The phone rang. It was an unknown number. Megan hesitated, then answered. The voice on the other end belonged to a woman who identified herself as a journalist from a major news outlet. Mrs. Megan Miller, we'd like an interview about your daughter's video. We have some questions about how she really managed to solve that problem. Was there outside help? Did someone train her specifically for that situation? No, Megan replied, her voice harsher than she intended. My daughter solved it on her own, and I'm not giving any interviews. She hung up, but the phone immediately rang again. Another journalist, and another, and another. Megan turned the phone off, but then the knocking started at the door. She peered through the peephole and saw 3 people with cameras and microphones in the hallway. Reporters. They had found out where she lived. "Mrs. Miller, we just want to hear your side of the story," a female voice shouted from the other side of the door. "People deserve to know the truth." Sophie curled up on the couch, hugging her knees. Megan closed all the curtains, locked the door and went back to her daughter. They stayed there, holding each other as the knocking continued, as the silent phone piled up with messages, as the world outside decided they were liars, opportunists, frauds, and somewhere in the city, in an office Megan didn't even know existed, someone watched the chaos unfold with a satisfied smile. Someone who had a lot to lose if the truth about Richard Davis came out. Someone who had sent that letter years ago. Someone who couldn't allow a 4-year-old girl to become famous enough for people to start asking questions about her father. Megan's phone vibrated one last time before the battery died. It was a message from a blocked number, just one sentence. "There's a way to make this stop. Call this number if you want to protect your daughter." Megan didn't call the number. She threw the phone in a drawer and spent the weekend locked in the apartment with Sophie. The knocking at the door eventually stopped, but she knew the reporters were still out there, waiting. She could feel them. Sunday passed in a heavy silence, with Sophie drawing equations in her father's notebooks, and Megan trying to figure out how to protect her daughter from a world that had decided to destroy them. On Monday morning, Megan woke up with a decision. She would go to Christine Adler's office. She would take the job if it was still available. She would show everyone she had nothing to hide. She put on her best clothes, carefully combed Sophie's hair, and they left through the back door of the building, avoiding the main entrance where a few people with cameras still lingered. Christine's office was in Soho, in a modern but not ostentatious building. When Megan arrived at the reception desk, a woman with glasses recognized her immediately. "Mrs. Miller?" the receptionist asked, and there was a cautious tone in her voice. "Do you have an appointment?" "Christine Adler asked me to come today, at 9. The receptionist exchanged an uncomfortable glance with another employee. She picked up the phone, dialed an extension and spoke quietly. Then she hung up and forced a smile. "Ms. Adler asks that you wait a few minutes. You can have a seat over there, please." Megan sat with Sophie on the reception couch. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 20. Other people arrived, were announced, and went up immediately. But they remained there, waiting. Sophie noticed. Megan could see in her daughter's eyes that she understood what was happening. After 40 minutes, Christine finally appeared, but she wasn't alone. She was accompanied by a grim-faced man in a grey suit and an older woman holding a folder of documents. Christine's face was tense, tired. It lacked the warmth she had shown on Thursday. "Megan, can we talk in private?" Christine asked, avoiding looking at Sophie. They went into a small meeting room. Sophie stayed in the reception area, sitting alone, swinging her legs that didn't reach the floor. Megan sat at the table, her heart beating too fast. "Megan, I need to be honest with you," Christine began, and from the first few words, Megan knew what was coming. "The situation has changed. The video of your daughter has caused an image problem. My partners are concerned. We have conservative clients, companies that value stability and discretion. Associating our brand with a public controversy would be..." "Would be what?" Megan interrupted, the anger she had suppressed all weekend finally finding its voice. "Would it be acknowledging that a poor child can be smart? Would it be admitting that genius exists in places you don't even look?" "That's not it," Christine sighed. "Megan, I believe you, I really do. But business is business. I have responsibilities. My partners voted against hiring you. I can't go against the board's decision." The man in the grey suit, who had been silent until then, cleared his throat. "Furthermore, Mrs. Miller, there are legal issues. TechVision is considering suing you and your daughter for defamation and fraud. They claim the video was staged with the intent of extorting the company. Associating ourselves with you at this time would be extremely damaging." Megan felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. She stood up, her legs trembling. "Extorting? My daughter was publicly humiliated. We were threatened." And now you're taking their side. We're not taking anyone's side, the older woman said, opening the folder. We're just being realistic. And there's a proposal that could resolve this for everyone. Tech Vision is willing to pay a substantial sum for you to sign a non-disclosure agreement. You will never speak of the incident again, never allow your daughter to be publicly exposed, and in return you'll receive enough money to start over somewhere else. Another city, perhaps. So you want me to disappear? Megan said, her voice low and broken. We want you to protect your daughter, Christine replied, but she couldn't meet Megan's eyes. Think about it. How long until this completely destroys her life? How long until Sophie can't walk down the street, go to school, have a normal childhood? The money can give you a fresh start, away from the spotlight, away from the hate. Megan left the room without answering. She took Sophie's hand, and the two of them left the building in silence. It was only when they were on the street that Megan realized she was crying from anger, from frustration, from helplessness. Sophie squeezed her hand tightly. Mum, I don't want to leave. It wasn't our fault. I know, sweetie. I know. They walked aimlessly, trying to process what had happened. Megan didn't know what to do anymore. Maybe taking the money really was the best option. Maybe running away was the only way to protect Sophie. That's when a man approached them on the sidewalk. He was in his 40s, with disheveled hair, a worn leather jacket, and a camera hanging around his neck. Megan instinctively pulled Sophie behind, her ready for another assault from some opportunistic reporter. Mrs. Miller, please wait, the man said, holding his hands up in a peaceful gesture. My name is Daniel Fisher. I'm an independent investigative journalist. And I knew Richard Davis. The name made Megan stop mid-stride. She turned, watching the man with suspicion. Everyone knew Richard after they destroyed him. I don't want to talk to any more journalists. I was his student, Daniel said, and there was an urgency in his voice. I took 2 classes with Professor Davis at Metropolitan University. He was the best teacher I ever had. When I saw the video of your daughter, when I saw how they're treating you, I knew I had to investigate, because what they did to Professor Davis was the same thing. They destroyed his reputation before anyone could listen to what he had to say. And what do you want? Megan asked, still on the defensive. I want to tell the truth, the real story. Daniel pulled a folder from his backpack. I spent the weekend investigating. I talked to former colleagues of Professor Davis, to university staff, to people who were there when he was fired. And there's something very wrong with this whole story. Something that connects the university to Tech Vision. Megan looked at the folder, then at Daniel. There was something sincere in his eyes, something she hadn't seen in anyone for the past few days. Do you have proof? I have the beginning of proof, but I need your help. I need you to trust me. Daniel crouched down to be at Sophie's level. Your daughter is brilliant. Professor Davis always said that true intelligence isn't in memorizing answers, but in asking the right questions. Sophie asked the right questions, and now someone is very afraid of what those questions might reveal. Sophie looked at her mother, then at Daniel. Then she spoke in that calm voice she used when she was sure of something. My dad always said the truth hurts at first, but it heals in the end. And that lies feel comfortable, but they rot from the inside. Daniel smiled, and there were tears in his eyes. He said that exact thing in his classes. He stood up and held the folder out to Megan. I found old financial records from the university. There's a connection between one of the administrators at the time and Tech Vision, suspicious money transfers, and there's more. Professor Davis was developing a revolutionary resource allocation algorithm before he was fired, an algorithm that could be worth millions. After he disappeared, that same algorithm suddenly appears registered under someone else's name, someone who works at Tech Vision to this day. Megan felt the air leave her lungs. She opened the folder with trembling hands and began to flip through the documents. There were copies of emails, bank statements, patent registrations. Everything pointed to a carefully constructed scheme. Richard hadn't just reported fraud. He had discovered his own work was being stolen. Who is this person? Megan asked. Mark Turner. He was an administrative coordinator at the university back then. Today, he's the CFO of Tech Vision, and he's one of the company's minority partners. Daniel paused. I want to publish this story, but I can't do it without your permission. It will put you and Sophie at the center of everything again. It will be hard, but it might be the only way to clear your names and Professor Davis's. Megan closed the folder. She looked at Sophie, who was watching with those eyes too deep for a 4-year-old. She thought of Richard. She thought of all the nights he spent teaching their daughter, even when he was broken and destroyed. She thought of how he never came home. Publish it, Megan said, her voice firm for the first time in days. Tell the whole truth. Daniel nodded. He took the folder back and pulled a recorder from his pocket. Then let's start. Tell me about Richard. Tell me about the day he disappeared. Tell me everything. And there, on the sidewalk of a busy Manhattan street, with Sophie sitting beside her and the morning sun on her face, Megan began to speak. She began to tell the story she had held inside for 3 years, the story of a good man who was destroyed for doing the right thing, the story that, finally, was about to come to light. But in an office just a few miles away, Mark Turner was getting a call. Someone had seen Megan talking to a journalist, and he knew exactly what that meant. He picked up his phone and made a call. It was time to take more drastic measures. It was time to ensure that story was never published. And that Sophie Miller never again had the chance to ask questions for which he had no convenient answers. Daniel's article was published the following Wednesday, not on a major news site, but on an independent investigative journalism platform he helped run. The headline was direct: The Stolen Algorithm, How a Professor Was Destroyed and His Invention Was Appropriated. The piece was meticulous. Daniel had spent days interviewing Richard's former colleagues, retired university employees, even some students who had witnessed his firing. He presented documents showing suspicious financial transfers between Mark Turner and members of the university's board. He showed how an algorithm developed by Richard in his academic research had been registered months later in Mark's name, without any mention of the true creator, and he connected it all to Sophie's viral video, suggesting that the smear campaign against her followed the same pattern used against her father. Megan read the article 3 times, sitting on her apartment couch. Every word was a validation, proof that she wasn't crazy, that Richard hadn't been the monster they painted him to be. But it was also terrifying, because now it was all out in the open. There was no turning back. In the first few hours, the article had little impact. A few hundred shares, supportive comments from people who already suspected the official story. But then, something unexpected happened. Tyler Thompson shared the article on his social media. His post was short but powerful. I've read this article 3 times. If half of what's in here is true, my company has been part of something unforgivable. I demand a full internal investigation. The truth needs to come out, no matter the cost. Within hours, the article exploded. Thousands of shares. Other news outlets started republishing it. Journalists began calling TechVision for a statement. The company's stock dropped 3% in a single day. Megan got a call from Daniel on Thursday afternoon. Megan, we did it. The story is gaining traction. But I need to warn you about something. Mark Turner just held a press conference. He's denying everything and saying you and I are working together to extort the company. He says the documents are forgeries. But they're not, Megan replied, feeling panic rise. You have proof. I do. But he has expensive lawyers and a PR machine. This is going to get ugly before it gets better. And it did. Mark not only denied the accusations, but launched a counteroffensive. He hired experts to analyze the documents Daniel had presented. The experts, paid by him, declared there were inconsistencies in the files. Mark gave tearful interviews, claiming he was being slandered by bitter people. He posted old photos of himself with Richard, claiming they were friends and that Richard had entrusted him with the algorithm before he disappeared. The narrative was being fought over in real time, and Megan saw public support waver. Some believed her and Daniel, others thought it was all an elaborate conspiracy, and many simply didn't know who to believe. Sophie started to feel the consequences at school. Megan had tried to keep her home for the first few days, but the girl insisted on going. She said she hadn't done anything wrong and shouldn't have to hide. But on Thursday, She came home with her eyes red from crying. "The kids kept calling me a liar," Sophie said, her voice choked. "They said my dad was a thief and I learned from him. The teacher didn't do anything. She just told me to ignore them." Megan hugged her daughter, feeling helplessness burn in her chest. She wanted to protect Sophie, to shield her from all of this, but she didn't know how. On Friday, things got worse. Megan was called to the school for a meeting. The principal, a middle-aged woman with a stern expression, sat behind her desk and steepled her fingers. "Mrs. Miller, we need to talk about Sophie. There have been incidents, arguments with other children. Some parents are concerned." "Concerned about what?" Megan asked, already knowing the answer but wanting to hear it out loud. "About the exposure, the controversy. Some families feel that Sophie's presence is causing a distraction and, well, discomfort." The principal couldn't look Megan in the eye. "We're suggesting that it might be best for everyone if Sophie took a temporary leave of absence until things calm down." "You're kicking my daughter out because she's too smart and it bothers rich people?" Megan felt her anger explode. "She didn't do anything wrong. We're not kicking anyone out. We are merely suggesting a temporary withdrawal, for her own good as well. Children can be cruel." "Children learn to be cruel from adults," Megan shot back, standing up. "And you just taught them that it's acceptable to push someone." "Out for being different." She stormed out of the office, slamming the door. She took Sophie's hand and they left the school. On the bus ride home, Sophie was silent, staring out the window. "Mom, did I do something wrong?" she finally asked. "No, sweetie, you didn't do anything wrong." Megan held her daughter's small hand. "Sometimes people are afraid of what they don't understand, and instead of trying to understand, they attack." "Is that what happened to Dad?" "That's exactly what happened. When they got home, someone was waiting at their apartment door. A thin, elderly man with white hair and simple clothes. He was clutching an old cardboard box to his chest and looked nervous. When he saw Megan, he struggled to his feet from the stairs where he'd been sitting. "Mrs. Megan Miller?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Yes. Who are you?" "My name is Joseph Carter. I was a janitor at Metropolitan University for 23 years. I knew Professor Davis." He held out the box. "I need to give you this. I should have given it to you a long time ago, but I was scared. But after I saw the article, after I saw what they're doing to the little girl, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore." Megan took the box with shaky hands. Inside were notebooks, yellowed papers, old flash drives, and a stack of sealed envelopes. "Professor Davis gave me this 2 days before he disappeared," Joseph continued. "He said if anything happened to him, I should keep it until it was safe to give to you. He said it had proof inside. Proof of everything. The stolen algorithm, the threats he received, who was behind it all." "Why did you wait 3 years?" Megan asked, tears starting to fall. Joseph looked down, ashamed. "Because I was scared. Because I'm a poor old man who can't afford to make powerful enemies. Because I have a family, and I didn't want them to suffer." He looked up, and there were tears in his eyes too. "But then, I saw that little girl facing all of that on her own. I saw her being attacked for doing the right thing, just like her father, and I realized my fear was nothing compared to her courage. Please forgive me for taking so long." Megan didn't know what to say. She hugged the box to her chest and nodded. Joseph turned to leave, but Sophie called out to him. "Mr. Carter," the girl said, "thank you for being my dad's friend. Thank you for finally doing the right thing." The old janitor smiled, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, and slowly walked down the stairs. Inside the apartment, Megan opened the box on the kitchen table. Sophie stood beside her, watching. The first notebook was in Richard's handwriting. Megan recognized it immediately, that careful, precise script. She began to read. They were journals, detailed notes about what Richard had discovered, names, dates, exact amounts of embezzled funds, recordings of conversations where Mark offered bribes, copies of deleted emails that Richard had managed to recover, and at the end, a long explanation of the algorithm he had developed, with all the original calculations, every step of his reasoning dated and witnessed. But what shook Megan the most was the last journal entry, dated the day before Richard disappeared. I received another threat today. This time they said if I didn't stop, it wouldn't just be my career that was destroyed. They mentioned Megan. They mentioned Sophie. They said accidents happen, that babies are fragile. I'm terrified. I don't know what to do anymore. I've scheduled a meeting for tomorrow. They said it's to negotiate, to find a solution. I'm leaving these notes with Joseph. If I don't come back, at least the truth will be safe somewhere. Sophie, if you're reading this one day, know that your dad loved you more than anything, and that everything I did was to try and leave a better world for you. Forgive me for not being strong enough. Megan covered her mouth with her hands, sobbing. Sophie hugged her mother, and the two of them cried together. Over the kitchen table, surrounded by Richard's last words. But now there was something they didn't have before. There was proof, real, undeniable proof. And Megan knew exactly what she had to do. She picked up the phone and called Daniel. I have everything, she said, her voice firm despite the tears. I have all the proof. Richard documented everything before he disappeared. And now we're going to end this once and for all. Across the city, in his top-floor office at TechVision, Mark Turner received a call from his lawyer. Someone had seen Joseph Carter visiting Megan's apartment, and he knew what the old janitor had been holding on to for 3 years. He knew because he was the one who gave the orders, who made the threats, who arranged the meeting from which Richard never returned. And now, for the first time in 3 years, Mark Turner felt real fear. Daniel arrived at Megan's apartment in less than an hour. He brought a lawyer with him, a woman in her 50s named Dr. Bennett, who specialized in intellectual property cases. They spent the entire night examining the documents Joseph had kept. They photographed every page, digitized every file from the flash drives, and organized every piece of evidence chronologically. This is gold, Dr. Bennett said at 3 in the morning, holding one of Richard's notebooks. It's not just enough to prove the algorithm was stolen. It's enough to open an investigation for threats, coercion, and possible involvement in Professor Davis's disappearance. Mark Turner is finished. And how long will that take? Megan asked, exhausted but unable to sleep. If we go through official channels, years. The system is slow, bureaucratic, and Mark has the resources to drag out any lawsuit indefinitely. Dr. Bennett paused. But there's another way. Faster, riskier. We publish everything. All the proof, all the documents. We make this so big it can't be ignored or swept under the rug. And the risk? Daniel asked. Mark will claim the documents were forged. He'll say Richard was paranoid, that he was mentally unstable. He'll try to destroy the credibility of everything, and he could sue all of us for defamation. The lawyer looked at Megan. You could lose everything, the little you still have. Megan looked at Sophie, who had fallen asleep on the couch, clutching one of her father's notebooks. She thought of Richard. She thought of all the times he had chosen to do the right thing, even knowing the cost. She thought of the courage he had tried to teach his daughter. Publish everything, Megan said. Let the consequences come. Daniel's second article was published on Saturday morning. This time it wasn't just text. It was complete documents, audio recordings, conversation transcripts. It was impossible to ignore. The headline was devastating. The proof, a professor threatened, an algorithm stolen, and the 3-year silence. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Within hours, the story was trending. Major news outlets republished it. TV shows dedicated segments to discussing it. The public pressure on TechVision and Mark Turner became unbearable, but Mark didn't surrender easily. On Saturday afternoon, he gave a live press conference. He looked impeccable in a navy blue suit and a discreet tie, his expression that of a man being wronged. Richard Davis was my friend, he said, his voice thick with false emotion. A brilliant but troubled man. Yes, he developed an innovative algorithm, but he gave it to me voluntarily, days before he disappeared. He said he no longer trusted himself, that he was having psychological problems. These documents being presented now were written during a period of extreme mental instability. They are the paranoid fantasies of a sick man. Megan watched the press conference, her stomach churning. Mark was good, very good. He sounded sincere, hurt, and people were believing him. The comments on social media were divided again. But then something unexpected happened. In the middle of the press conference, a man walked into the room. It was Klaus Hoffmann, the German expert from the Tech Vision meeting, the one who had confirmed Sophie's solution. He walked to the microphone and interrupted Mark. "Mr. Turner, my name is Klaus Hoffmann. I was hired by Tech Vision as a specialist consultant on logistics algorithms, and I need to say something I should have said a long time ago." Klaus turned to the cameras. "When I started working here 6 months ago, I was shown the base algorithm the company uses. I was told it was developed in-house by Mark Turner. But when I saw the solution that the little girl, Sophie Miller, created in that meeting room, I immediately recognized the mathematical style. It was identical to the base algorithm. The way the problem was structured, the approach to variable distribution, everything was the same. Sophie didn't copy anything. She was applying principles her father taught her, principles that Richard Davis created." The room erupted with questions. Mark turned red, trying to regain control. Klaus continued, relentless. "Furthermore, last night I reviewed the documents Richard Davis left behind. They are authentic. I recognize the mathematical development. No algorithm appears fully formed. It's built in stages, with trial and error, with refinements. Richard's notebooks show that process. The algorithm registered in Mark Turner's name appears complete with no development history. That's impossible, unless it was copied." Mark tried to respond, but Klaus was already leaving the room. The press conference ended in chaos, and for the first time the scale of public opinion began to tip definitively against Mark Turner. But while that was happening, another drama was unfolding. On Sunday morning, Megan received a call from Joseph Carter. The old janitor was terrified. "Mrs. Miller, I'm at the hospital. Someone broke into my house last night. They smashed everything. They said it was a lesson to keep my mouth shut. They hurt my granddaughter. She's 8. She was just spending the weekend with me." His voice was broken, filled with guilt. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for getting you into this." Megan's blood ran cold. She looked at Sophie, who was in the living room drawing. She thought that if anyone touched her daughter, if anyone hurt Sophie— "Joseph, it's not your fault. I'm on my way. Don't come. It's not safe. They know who you are. They know where you live." He paused. "Be careful. These people won't stop." Megan hung up, her hands shaking. She immediately called Daniel and told him what happened. He promised to go to the hospital to talk to Joseph and file a report. But the sense of danger didn't pass. Megan started noticing strange things. A dark car parked across the street for 2 days. A man she saw at the bus stop in the morning and again at night. Maybe it was paranoia, or maybe not. On Monday, things escalated unexpectedly. Megan woke to urgent knocking at the door. It was Dr. Bennett with Daniel. They both looked alarmed. "You need to get out of here now," Bennett said bluntly. "What happened?" "Tech Vision announced they're suing you, Sophie, Daniel, and me for defamation and extortion. They're asking for absurd amounts of money, and there's more. Mark Turner filed a motion claiming you're keeping Sophie in a psychologically damaging environment. He's petitioning for temporary custody of the girl while they investigate." Megan felt the world spin. "He wants to take my daughter." "It's an intimidation tactic. He won't get it, but while this is in the courts, you're not safe here." Daniel stepped into the apartment. "I have a place, an aunt's house upstate, 2 hours from here. You can stay there for a few days while we sort this out." "I'm not running," Megan said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "It's not running. It's protecting yourselves." Bennett placed a hand on Megan's shoulder. "They're getting desperate. Desperate people do terrible things, and Joseph has already proven they have no limits." Sophie appeared in the hallway, still in her pajamas, holding one of her father's notebooks. "Mom, I think we should go. Dad wrote in here that when you can't fight head-on, you have to retreat to find a better angle." Megan looked at her daughter. 4 years old. She should be worried about toys and cartoons, not about running from dangerous men. The injustice of it all burned. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's pack." They left the apartment half an hour later. Daniel drove, Bennett in the passenger seat, Megan and Sophie in the back. They took only the essentials: a few clothes, Richard's documents, the notebook Sophie loved so much. They had been on the highway for 40 minutes when Megan noticed it, the dark car, the same one that had been parked across from their building. It was 3 cars behind them. "Daniel," she said, trying to keep her voice calm, "I think we're being followed." Daniel glanced in the rearview mirror. His jaw tightened. "Hold on," he said, and hit the gas. The car behind them accelerated too. It started weaving through traffic, closing in fast. Megan hugged Sophie, covering her daughter's head. Bennett fumbled with her phone, trying to call someone, but the call kept dropping. They were in an area with a weak signal. The dark car was beside them now. Megan could see 2 men inside. The driver's face was hidden by sunglasses. The passenger was pointing to the side of the road, gesturing for them to pull over. "Don't stop," Bennett said. "Don't stop for anything." But then the dark car slammed into them. The impact sent Daniel's car swerving. He wrestled with the wheel, trying to maintain control. Sophie screamed. Megan held her daughter with all the strength she had. The dark car hit them again, and this time Daniel's car veered completely off the road, onto the dirt shoulder. Daniel slammed on the brakes. The car skidded, spun, and finally came to a stop just feet from a wire fence. For a moment there was only silence. Then, the sound of doors opening. The 2 men from the dark car were getting out, walking toward them, and Megan, looking at Sophie, trembling in her arms, knew they had reached the point of no return. Daniel was the first one out of the car. He positioned himself between the approaching men and the vehicle where Megan and Sophie were. Bennett got out on the other side, her phone in her hand, desperately trying to get a signal. "Stay in the car," Daniel said, his eyes fixed on the 2 men. The taller of the 2, a man in his 40s with a black leather jacket, stopped a few feet away. He took off his sunglasses, revealing cold, calculating eyes. "We just want the documents," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Hand over the notebooks and the flash drives the old janitor gave you, and there won't be any trouble." "We don't have anything here," Daniel lied. "It's all in a safe place." The man smiled, but it was a humorless smile. "Don't lie to me. I saw you leaving the apartment with backpacks and bags. I know it's all in the car." He took another step forward. "You don't understand the situation. This isn't about money or reputation. There are things in those documents that can't come out, things that go beyond stolen algorithms." "What do you mean?" Bennett asked, keeping her distance. "Professor Davis found out more than you think. The algorithm was just the tip of the iceberg. He uncovered a much bigger scheme. Embezzlement of public funds, fraudulent government contracts, money laundering through fake patents." The man paused. "Mark Turner is just a pawn. There are much more powerful people involved, people who can't afford to have this information go public." Megan's blood ran cold. She looked at the notebooks piled on the seat next to her. How many pages hadn't she read yet? How many secrets had Richard discovered? Then, "Come and get them," Daniel said, his voice defiant. The second man, younger and more nervous, stepped forward. But before he could do anything, the sound of a siren cut through the air. Everyone turned. A police car was approaching on the highway. The man in the black jacket cursed under his breath. He signaled to his partner, and the 2 of them ran back to the dark car. In seconds, they had turned around and disappeared down the road. The police car pulled up behind Daniel's. 2 officers got out, an older man and a young woman, the female. Officer approached quickly. "Is everyone okay? We saw the accident from the highway. Is anyone hurt?" Daniel quickly explained what had happened. The officer took notes, asked for descriptions of the men and the car, and took pictures of the damage to their vehicle. The older officer scanned the area, looking for evidence. "You're going to need to file a formal police report," the officer said. "And honestly, after what you've told me, I don't think you should continue on your own." "Where were you headed?" Daniel gave the address of his aunt's house. The officer exchanged a look with her partner. "We'll escort you there, and I'll have the local precinct send a car to keep an eye on the place tonight." It was a tense 40-minute drive to the house. It was a simple, 1-story home, painted white, surrounded by a small garden. Daniel's aunt, Mrs. Mendez, a woman with white hair and a warm smile, welcomed them with tight hugs and hot tea. But not even her kindness could dispel the tension. Megan stayed up all night, looking out the window, checking to see if the dark car would reappear. Sophie slept fitfully, waking up several times. From nightmares. On Tuesday morning, Daniel received a call that changed everything. It was Klaus Hoffmann, the German expert. "Daniel, I need to talk to you urgently. Not on the phone, in person." They arranged to meet at a coffee shop in the center of the next town over, far from anywhere that might be monitored. Daniel went alone, leaving Megan, Sophie and Bennett at the house with Mrs. Mendez and the police car on guard. Klaus was at a table in the back when Daniel arrived. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He had deep circles under. His eyes and his hands trembled slightly as he held his coffee cup. "I made a mistake by speaking publicly," Klaus said as soon as Daniel sat down. "I thought I was doing the right thing, that the truth was enough. But it's not. Since that press conference, I've been getting threats. Calls in the middle of the night, cars following me. Yesterday, they found my dog. Poisoned." His voice broke. "I'm scared, Daniel. Truly scared." "What do you want me to do?" Daniel asked, keeping his voice low. "I want to give you something that can end this once and for all." Klaus took a flash drive from his pocket. "I accessed the Tech Vision servers. I shouldn't have, it was illegal, but I had to know how deep this went. And I found protected files, internal conversations between Mark and other people, deleted emails recovered from the backup, everything about Richard Davis, about what really happened to him." Daniel took the flash drive with trembling hands. "What's on here?" "The truth. The whole truth. Richard didn't just disappear. He was—" Klaus closed his eyes as if the word pained him to say. "He was lured to a fake meeting. They threatened his family. They said if he didn't disappear voluntarily, something would happen to his wife and baby daughter. Richard tried to negotiate. He said he had copies of everything, that he'd left proof behind, but they didn't believe him. Or they didn't care." "Where is he?" Daniel asked, though he knew he didn't want to hear the answer. The emails suggest someone was paid to make him disappear permanently. There are no exact details, but there are references to a payment made to a man named Oscar Price, described as a problem solver. And there's a message from Mark to one of the others involved saying, "The professor won't be bothering anyone anymore." Daniel felt a wave of nausea. Richard hadn't abandoned his family. He hadn't run away out of cowardice. He had been eliminated because he knew too much. And Megan had spent 3 years thinking he might have chosen to leave. "Why are you giving this to me?" Daniel asked. "If this goes public, you'll become a target too." "I'm already a target, and I have no family here in the States. I have no one they can use against me." Klaus stood up. "Use this. Finish what Professor Davis started, and then forgive me. But I'm going back to Germany and trying to forget I was ever involved in any of this." He left the coffee shop without looking back. Daniel sat there, holding the flash drive, feeling the weight of 3 years of lies and pain concentrated in that tiny device. When he returned to Mrs. Mendez's house, it was late at night. He found Megan on the porch, alone, looking up at the starry sky. "Is Sophie asleep?" he asked. "Yes, finally." Megan turned to him, and even in the darkness Daniel could see she had been crying. "I keep thinking about what I'm going to tell her, how I'm going to explain all this when she's older, how I'm going to make her understand that the world can be so cruel." Daniel hesitated. Then he decided she deserved to know the truth, all of it. He sat beside her and told her everything Klaus had revealed, about the emails, about the threats, about what had likely happened to Richard. Megan listened in silence. When Daniel finished, she sat motionless for long minutes, processing. Then, unexpectedly, she started to laugh. It wasn't a laugh of joy. It was a broken, bitter laugh from someone who had reached the limit of what they could endure. "I spent 3 years hating him," she said between laughs and sobs. 3 years thinking he had abandoned us, that he had chosen to run instead of fight, and the whole time he was trying to protect us, and he died for it." Daniel didn't know what to say. He put a hand on her shoulder, offering the only comfort he could. They sat there in silence, under the stars, as the weight of the truth finally settled. The next morning, Wednesday, the decision was made. Daniel would publish everything, the emails, the conversations, all the proof Klaus had found. There would be no more turning back, no more middle ground. But before they could do anything, Bennett got a call. It was from the courthouse. An emergency hearing had been scheduled for that afternoon. Mark Turner was using every resource available to get temporary custody of Sophie, claiming Megan was mentally unstable and was putting her daughter in danger by running away and getting involved with criminals like Daniel. "You have to go back to the city," Bennett said. "Now, if you don't show up, the judge could grant custody to the state for abandonment, and then it will be much harder to get Sophie back." Megan felt panic tighten its grip on her throat. She looked at Sophie, who was in the living room coloring in one of her father's notebooks with pencils borrowed from Mrs. Mendez. "They can't take my daughter," Megan whispered. "I won't let them." "Then we'll fight," Daniel said. "But we have to do it the right way, in court, with the proof we have." And so, 6 hours later, Megan found herself walking into a courthouse in downtown Manhattan, holding Sophie's hand too tightly, walking toward a room where Mark Turner was waiting for her with a confident smile and a team of expensive lawyers. Walking toward a battle that would decide not only her daughter's future, but the legacy of Richard Davis and the truth he had died trying to protect. The hearing room was small and claustrophobic. Mark Turner sat with his 3 lawyers, all in impeccable suits with confident expressions. On the other side, Megan and Sophie sat next to Dr. Bennett, who looked tiny compared to the opposing team. Daniel was in the public seating, along with a few other people who had managed to get in. The judge, Frank Carter, a man in his 60s with grey hair and reading glasses, entered, and everyone rose. He examined the documents before him with a neutral expression before beginning. "This is an emergency hearing to evaluate the petition for temporary custody of the minor, Sophie Miller. Mr. Turner, your counsel alleges that the child's mother is placing her in a situation of risk. Would you like to present your arguments?" Mark's lead attorney, a thin man, in a pinstripe suit, stood up. "Your Honor, Mrs. Megan Miller has fled with her minor daughter. She has involved the child in a defamatory campaign against my client. She has exposed the girl to dangerous situations, including car chases and accidents. We have reports that the child has been removed from school and is being kept at an unknown location. This constitutes negligence and endangers the minor's psychological development." Bennett stood immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. My client did not flee. She temporarily relocated to protect her daughter from concrete and documented threats. There is, in fact, a police report regarding the incident on the highway." "Threats she created herself by slandering my client," Mark's lawyer retorted. "This woman is using her daughter as a shield in an extortion campaign." The judge banged his gavel. "Order. Dr. Bennett, do you have proof of these threats beyond the police report?" "I do, Your Honor, and I have much more than that." Bennett opened her briefcase and took out a flash drive. "I request permission to present evidence that not only proves the threats, but reveals the true nature of this case." Mark became visibly tense. His lawyers exchanged nervous glances. The judge nodded, and a clerk connected the flash drive to a computer. A screen was lowered in the room. Bennett began to present the documents. First, Richard's notebooks, showing the complete development of the algorithm, with dates and notes. Then, the patent registrations in Mark's name, with no development history. The comparison was stark. "Your Honor, here we have irrefutable proof that Professor Richard Davis's work was stolen," Bennett continued. "But that is just the beginning." She moved on to the emails Klaus had obtained, conversations between Mark and other executives discussing how to handle the Richard problem. Messages about suspicious payments, and finally the most damning email, "The professor won't be bothering anyone anymore." The room fell into absolute silence. Mark was pale, sweating. His lawyers were whispering frantically among themselves. "These emails were obtained illegally," one of them protested. "They can't be used as evidence." "They were obtained by a company employee who had legitimate access to the servers," Bennett replied calmly. "And furthermore, Your Honor, this information has already been shared with the district attorney's office. There is an active criminal investigation into the disappearance of Professor Richard Davis." The judge took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly, processing what he was seeing. Then he turned to Mark. "Mr. Turner, would you like to respond to these allegations?" Mark opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His lawyers tried to intervene, but the judge silenced them with a gesture. "Mr. Turner, I'm giving you an opportunity to speak." This is a misunderstanding," Mark finally managed to say, but his voice was trembling. "Those emails were taken out of context. Richard was my friend. I would never—" At that moment, the courtroom door opened. A man entered, escorted by 2 bailiffs. It was Joseph Carter, the janitor. His arm was in a sling and he had bandages on his face, the results of the break-in he had suffered, but his eyes were firm and determined. "Excuse me, Your Honor," he said, his voice clear. "My name is Joseph Carter. I was a janitor at Metropolitan University for 23 years, and I need to testify about what I saw the night Professor Richard Davis disappeared." The judge nodded, allowing him to continue. Joseph walked to the front of the room. "I was working late that night. I saw when Professor Davis arrived on campus. He had a meeting scheduled. He was nervous but determined." Joseph looked directly at Mark. "I saw when Mr. Turner arrived too, along with another man, a big guy I'd never seen before. They went into the administrative department's meeting room. I was cleaning the hallway. I heard shouting. I heard Professor Davis saying he had copies of everything, that he couldn't be threatened. I heard Mr. Turner say it was too late, that he should have taken the offer to stay quiet." "That's a lie," Mark shot up from his seat. "You can't prove any of that." "I can't prove what I heard, but I can prove that I saw Professor Davis go in alive and not come out. I saw when the 2 of you came out alone, carrying a large suitcase. A suitcase you didn't have when you went in." Joseph paused. "I was scared. So scared I kept the secret for 3 years, but I can't live with it anymore, not after seeing what they tried to do to his daughter." The room erupted in murmurs. The judge banged his gavel several times, calling for order. Mark's lawyers were all trying to talk at once, but Mark was motionless, his face ashen, staring at his own hands as if he didn't recognize them. That's when Sophie stood up. The 4-year-old girl walked to the center of the room, stopping between the 2 tables. Everyone fell silent, watching. She looked at Mark with those deep eyes that seemed to see right through people. "My dad taught me that numbers don't lie," Sophie said, her clear voice echoing in the silent room. "He said you can lie with words, but the numbers always tell the truth. All the equations he created are in the notebooks, every step, every thought, every mistake and correction. Your numbers just appear finished because you didn't create them, you stole them." "Sophie, honey, you don't understand," Mark tried, his voice breaking. "I didn't want any of this to happen. Your father was stubborn. He wouldn't listen to reason. He was going to destroy a lot of people with those accusations. I just wanted—" "Wanted what?" Megan stood up, tears streaming down her face. "Wanted to get rich off his work. Wanted him to disappear so you could steal 3 years of research. Wanted my daughter to grow up without a father." Mark buried, his face in his hands. His shoulders began to shake. And then, to the shock of everyone, he began to speak. The words poured out of him, a river of confession that could no longer be contained. It wasn't supposed to be like this. It was just to scare him, to make him stop. But Richard had evidence of everything. The fake diplomas, the embezzled funds, the fraudulent patents. There were millions involved. Powerful people were implicated. They told me either I solved the problem or I would be the next problem. I was in debt. I was desperate. I thought if I just got rid of the evidence. "But you got rid of my dad," Sophie said, and her voice, so small and young, carried an infinite pain. "I didn't want to," Mark was sobbing now. "I swear I didn't. But the man I hired, he said there was no other way, that Richard knew too much. And after that there was no turning back. I had to pretend everything was normal. I had to move on as if nothing had happened." The silence that followed was deafening. The judge was pale, gripping his gavel so tightly his knuckles were white. The bailiffs were already moving toward Mark. "Mr. Mark Turner," the judge said, his voice grave, "you have just confessed, under oath and in open court, to involvement in the disappearance and probable murder of Richard Davis. I order your immediate arrest. And as for the petition for temporary custody, it is obviously denied. This hearing is adjourned." The officers handcuffed Mark. He didn't resist. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. As he was led away, he looked one last time at Sophie. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry for everything." Sophie didn't answer. She just turned and hugged her mother. In the days that followed, Mark's confession triggered a massive investigation. Other names were revealed: members of the university's board, Tech Vision executives, even public officials who had facilitated the schemes. Powerful people began to fall like dominoes. The story of Sophie and Megan took on a new dimension. They were no longer seen as opportunists or liars. They were symbols of courage, of perseverance against greater forces, of a truth that could not be buried forever. Christine Adler, the businesswoman who had offered Megan a job, reached out to them again. This time with a genuine apology and an unconditional offer. Megan accepted. She began working to manage inclusion programs at the company, using her experience to ensure other invisible people were given opportunities. Tyler Thompson took control of Tech Vision after Mark's arrest and his father's resignation. His first act was to create a fund in Richard Davis's name, dedicated to supporting independent researchers and protecting whistleblowers from academic and corporate misconduct. He sought out Sophie personally to apologize. "You taught me something my years at expensive universities never did," Tyler said, crouching at the girl's level. "You taught me that courage doesn't come from power or money. It comes from doing the right thing even when it's hard." Sophie accepted his apology with the grace of someone much older. 6 months later, on a sunny Saturday morning, Megan and Sophie were at a park. The girl, now 5, ran among the trees, free and happy in a way she hadn't been for a long time. Megan watched from a bench, a small but genuine smile on her face. Daniel approached, bringing ice cream for them. He had become a close family friend, almost an uncle to Sophie. "I got a call today," he said, sitting next to Megan. "They found Richard's body in a rural area 2 hours from the city. One of the men involved confessed the location in exchange for a reduced sentence." Megan closed her eyes, silent tears streaming down her face. It was a mixture of pain and relief, pain at losing Richard for good, relief at finally being able to bury him with dignity. "Sophie deserves a place to visit her father," Daniel continued softly. "Somewhere she can talk to him, even if he can't answer." "Yes," Megan agreed. "She deserves that." The funeral was simple, but moving. Richard's former students attended, many telling stories of how he had changed their lives. Joseph Carter was there, standing beside Megan like a silent guardian. Klaus Hoffmann sent flowers from Germany. And Sophie, with impossible maturity, placed one of her father's notebooks on the casket. "You can rest now, Daddy," she whispered. "The truth won." A year passed. Sophie attended a new school where her intelligence was celebrated, not feared. She made friends. She laughed more. She still carried her father's notebooks, but now she also created her own, filling pages with equations and drawings that blended mathematics with art. Megan had found a peace she didn't know was possible. The apartment in Queens was exchanged for a small but comfortable apartment on the Upper West Side, closer to her work and Sophie's school. The scars still ached, but they were healing. On a rainy Saturday afternoon, while Sophie was drawing in the living room and Megan was making dinner, the girl spoke without looking up from her paper. "Mom, I had a dream about Dad last night." "You did?" Megan stopped what she was doing. "And what did he say?" "He said he's proud. He said to keep asking questions always, because the right questions are more important than the easy answers." Sophie looked up, smiling. "And he said you're the bravest person he ever knew." Megan knelt beside her daughter, hugging her tightly. "We're both brave," she whispered, "because your dad taught us that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right, even when you are." And in that small apartment, as the rain fell outside and the smell of a home-cooked meal filled the air, a 5-year-old girl and her 33-year-old mother were building, together, a future that Richard Davis didn't live to see but had made possible. A future where the truth mattered, where justice could be found, where a brilliant child didn't have to hide, but could shine. And somewhere, in a dimension beyond the reach of the mathematics and logic that Richard loved so much, a professor smiled, knowing his legacy wasn't in algorithms or equations, but in the curious, courageous eyes of his daughter, who would keep asking the right questions in a world that desperately needed true answers.